Hello everybody and welcome to Imagination TV, and we're pumped to be here. I'm coming to you from Australia and currently in Victoria, and today we're kickstarting a really exciting project to keep enhancing this work that we've been looking at around imagination. Now it's been 18 years of AIME doing our work, and 18 years ago I was lucky enough to wander down a street in Sydney University to hang out with a bunch of Indigenous kids in Australia at a local high school and try and work out how to navigate the complexities of inequality that we'd inherited, and work out how we could rehatch different networks and different patterns, how we could try and build pathways that weren't there, and to try and work out how we unlock the potential of all human beings and build systems where everybody gets an opportunity and gets a chance. And as we've been working through trying to navigate inequity, we grew as an organisation across Australia, building bridges, and then we're like, oh, it turns out inequality is not just restricted to one nation state. And so then in the last 6 years, we've been working as a network around the world and working with people inside and outside the margins and building these unlikely connections. And so that's been one thing that we've learned. Okay, maybe unlikely connections can help us unlock our potential, and that helps us sort of work in parallel against some of the networks we've inherited, which were by design set up to put power into the hands of a very small group of people. But then the next question is like, what do you teach kids? You know, like if you're going to set up a mentoring curriculum, or if you're going to set up a schooling curriculum, how do you prepare young people? And probably the one thing we've found as a commonality throughout every young person and every human being that we have that makes a human being special is imagination. And one of the things that seems to not be in our school curriculums consistently is imagination. And I'm wondering whether that's by design, whether that's just been one big blind spot from some of our educational designers over the last couple 100 years. But what we're looking at trying to do over the next 10 years is really build a big coalition of people working on imagination and try and work out whether we can codify it, whether we can build it into some muscular tools that teachers can train, that practitioners can work with, and that we can combine all of that energy and bring it together. So we're amped to be hanging out with a crew called Learning Planet today and bring together a coalition of educators and designers and creators and storytellers from around the world to embark on an emergent process. We're not actually sure if we're ever going to be able to bottle imagination, but we think the intention of trying to build a body of research and thinking on top of what we've already inherited could be a really important set of tools to leave behind. So we kickstart today's show with a reflection. 3 years ago, we sat down with a bunch of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander kids and other Australian kids in a place called Garma, which is in a really remote location in Australia, and with them we drafted an imagination declaration for teachers and for our Prime Minister in Australia, and then for leaders around the world. So we'll throw back to that clip, and Garma is actually happening right now, and the kids are gathering and exploring their imagination and hope and what the future can look like. And then you'll hear from a very special person on the other side of this video.
It's time to think differently. With 60,000 years of genius and imagination in our hearts and minds, we can be one of the groups of people that transform the future of life on Earth for the good of us all. We can design the solutions that lift islands up in the face of rising seas. We can work on creative agricultural solutions that are in sync with our natural habitat. We can re-engineer schooling. We can invent new jobs and technologies. And we can unite around kindness. We are not the problem. We are the solution. We don't want to be boxed. We don't want ceilings. We want freedom to be whatever a human mind can dream. When you think of an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander kid, or any kid, imagine what's possible. Don't define us through the lens of disadvantage or label us as limited. Test us. Expect the best of us. Expect the unexpected. Expect us to continue carrying the custodianship of imagination, entrepreneurial spirit, and genius. Expect us to be complex. And then let us spread our wings and soar higher than ever before. As called for in the Uluru Statement from the Heart, give our people a voice. We call on you and the education ministers across the nation to establish an imagination agenda for our Indigenous kids and in fact for all Australian children. We urge you to give us the freedom to write a new story. We want to show the world Aboriginal genius. We want to show Australia Aboriginal leadership and imagination for the whole nation. Over the coming months, we'll be sharing the declaration of thousands of Indigenous kids across our nation. And together we'll say, set an imagination agenda for our classrooms. Remove the limited thinking around our disadvantage. Stop looking at us as a problem to fix. And set us free to be the solution and give us a stage to light up the world. We want the imagination agenda in every school in the nation, from early childhood learning through to our most prominent universities. To our Prime Minister and Education Ministers, we call on you to meet with us and to work on an imagination plan for our country's education system, for all of us.
Olivier, do you want to jump in and introduce yourself and share a little bit about Learning Planet and how you're fitting into this imagination wandering that we're setting out upon?
Olivier's just frozen, but I can jump in. From Learning Planet team, Ed Stevenette, been supported and guided by Olivier over several years. For us, we're a wider network and alliance of around 300 organizations, institutions working on the transformation of learning globally. This is through the specific groups, circles around kind of core thematic priorities for education transformation, around celebrating learning to take care of oneself, others, and the planet through our festival every year around the International Day of Education, and many things in between. And for us, we've been discussing and building connections with AIME, with many of you over many years around imagination. Everyone, I think, agrees that we need to use imagination in education, but there is a real potential for imagination as a tangible tool, a pedagogical tool for transformation. And it's been incredible seeing, firstly, through AIME's work in imagination curriculums, and through many of what the speakers that you'll be seeing today have been doing for imagination residencies, projects, contests, programs, that this really works and is creating some incredible change. And so we're just happy to join on this journey in this collaboration together, and full of gratitude for you being here today and seeing what emerges. Cheers, chat.
Let's I think you're in the hot seat now, Ed. You're the official sub co-host while Olivier's internet juggles in and out along the way. And I'm not sure, Olivier, if you are there, if you want to jump in and add anything, I'll give you a moment, and if not, we'll keep moving through.
Please go ahead, because I guess my connection is too bad. So I'll be listening to you. That's good enough. And I'm very happy to welcome everybody again.
Let's have you as our undercover, sending the notes in, and we'll be like, oh, that's a good insight because we're trying to talk and there's a smart person who's listening. All right, let's jump into our first panel really quickly. And Karima, if you're there, we'd love to hear from you to tell us a little bit about your story, and then we'll bounce around the group. So yeah, if you want to introduce yourself, let's go for it.
Is that me?
That is, yeah.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure I heard well. I'm just making sure. Well, my name is Karima. I'm here with you from Morocco. Karima means generous. And I'm in Tangier. And well, maybe to start here, let's start by imagining together. And let's just imagine that last night, a miracle happened and the dreamed education system is actually here. And we are living it. What would we be talking about today? What would we be feeling today? What would bring us together today? If we just take a few seconds, my colleagues and friends who are here in this panel, whoever is listening, just think about it. Let's leave the education system as we experience it today and just say, it is how I dreamed. It would be like this beautiful speech we just heard right now. What would we talk about? And maybe what would be the questions that we would have? So isn't that what imagination is about? Would we be talking about education at all? And if we would, what would that word even mean? Would we be talking about the future of education? Or would we be recognizing the future in our present and learning how to recognize it? Would we be talking about content, pedagogies, or would we be going to the essence of what makes us human? The humanity that defines us and connects us, beyond our conscious grasps, to ourselves, to each other, to our natural world? Would we be talking about skills, about how do we create the conditions to express our humanity? Would we be trying to find answers? Or would we delight at seeing how our questions evolve, dilating our perceptions, expanding our gaze, and growing our language? Would we be talking about what to learn or how to learn, and the ecology that brings that learning? That makes that learning part of who we are, so we don't even need to talk about learning. Do I talk about my breathing? Would we be teaching theories, formulas, or would we be delighted, in awe, to explore and to encounter all the different thoughts, all the different perspectives? We are different lamps. It's one light, one humanity. Will we be learning to be in the in-between, to grow a shared understanding? Do not give me your formula, just give me how you thought to get to that formula. So this is, all these questions is really how our process in Temkin Community Foundation started. Not necessarily these questions. 14 years ago, we had other questions. Today, our questions are evolving, and we are delighted to see how our questions are evolving. And
well,
we question.
Karima, I might just jump in quickly because I feel like we could just stop the show, or we could just let you keep talking for another 30 minutes and it would probably sum up everything that we're starting to try and explore. But I might just bring in a couple of the other people. And I think that like that tension between, I grew up in a world, Australia has very some very limited storytelling sometimes in some of our narratives. And I was lucky to grow up with a bit of a mashup in my story. So my family is Indigenous to Australia through my mum's side, and that's been a really big part of my life and part of what helped spark the energy to want to start AIME. But then I also grew up like being a bit of a masculine guy who wanted to play sport, and sport like was where some of the male heroes are, and you learn to work hard and break yourself until you succeed, and you're always muscling. And more recently, in the last 6 years, I've been trying to understand and find more of a flow state to move more naturally with how the world works. And we're going to bring in a couple other people here to join us now. So Alan, if we've got you there, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself, and if you can, try and answer the question, what the heck is imagination?
Great, yeah, thanks, Jack. So I'm Alan Bolden. I'm Chief Executive of a place called Dartington Trust. Some of you may know Schumacher College, that's part of the trust, and we have an art school and lots of other things. I also started a company called Weave to reimagine learning. I suppose just first thought is just, I'm an artist originally still, and I've been involved in a lot of designing of arts education. And what you really don't do in arts education is say, hey, everyone, just go be imaginative, be creative. It doesn't really work like that. And I think about the STEM agenda in education, which probably many of us on this call think is misguided. But I wouldn't discard science, technology, engineering, etc. I think it's about how we connect up, and that actually in all areas of human endeavor, imagination plays a huge part. I was lucky enough to have some time with the neuroscientist Ian McGilchrist recently, and he said that we need to really look at how we move between the rational, the logical, the intuitive, and the imaginative. And it was about moving between and somehow bringing all of those different perspectives, especially because we're facing these enormous challenges. I think about the chemist Kekule, who was trying to work out the structure of benzene. It's a famous example, but he had his method. His method was super important. He was very rigorous in applying that method. But it was only when he went to sleep and dreamt of a snake eating its tail that he realized that the structure was a ring shape. Or I think about the story of Perseus and Medusa, that looking at something full on can be terrifying. So those who had tried to approach Medusa were turned to stone. What Perseus could do was look in the shield and see the reflection. And it's often thought of as a story of how the arts work or how the imagination works, that sometimes looking directly can be too confrontational, too terrifying. Or I think about the poet John Donne, who said, "He who will approach the hill of truth, about must go." Rather than going directly, somehow we have to circle things. And I think that's part of the method of bringing in imagination in relationship to these other ways that we engage with problems. I think Ed mentioned imagination residencies. Just to conclude, one of the things I'm working on is a network of international residencies where we're bringing artists and scientists and technologists together, engaged in place-based inquiries. I do think that place-based, in a way, going back to Karima's question, what would learning look like? I think it would look like a lot of places engaged in place-based and problem-based learning. I think there are some great methods that we know really well. I think we would be exploring this process of oscillation between the rational, the logic, the intuitive, and the imaginative. And I think we'd be sharing our various inquiries more or less simultaneously across the globe and sharing insights. And, I think Francois has posted that the only thing that moves quicker than light is imagination. It makes me think about entanglement, an idea in quantum physics, where when there's been some fundamental relationship, for instance, between particles and looking at their spin, once that relationship's there, it's there forever. And, you can move one of those particles to the other side of the universe, and there will still be that relationship and that simultaneous connection and sharing. I think there's an idea of a collective imagination that we can participate in, build relationship in, and the sharing of their collective wisdom is something that we could explore in the way that we design our education systems. That's probably long enough.
No, it's great, Alan. And I think that, yeah, those processes are so powerful. And I you know, it's one of the things that's been passed on to me through our Indigenous systems, thinking back here, and with a number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have sort of taken me under their wing over the years. And there's this, I got to be in this beautiful conversation with this, like, who's a good friend, and this guy Tyson Younger Porter is a really strong Indigenous systems thinker here, and Fridtjof Capra, and we were talking about processes of emergence. And I think one of the challenges I see in the way that we're sort of building our weaves is that we still have quite a lot of limitations around our desire to control the outcome. And I think that in a design frame in terms of impact, it can really block the energy flow of that imaginative relational pattern, which we're kind of talking to. And I think that was where we got to with, you know, yarning with Ed and Olivier about this experience was, can we just mash together a group of people who are already doing some stuff, and then let's just hang out as a gang for 10 years and let's see what happens. And, you know, there's the MIT Media Labs case study. There's lots of case studies of putting together different elements. And our experience to date has just been that one way to generate imagination is through unlikely connections. And Valerie, I'd love to bring you in now, and then we'll open it up a little bit to this crew. And, you know, unfortunately, we're going to have to keep moving through because we've got some wonderful people to talk to today, but hopefully we're just starting to, you know, scratch the surface of these unlikely connections. But Valerie, how do you navigate working within, you know, a reasonably formal institution and trying to sort of, you know, push the edges of research and then inform it to actually be picked up within the system?
Oh, that's a good question. Hi, I'm Valerie, and I've got this screenshot. It's the quad at Sydney Uni, and I'm coming from Wadi country down in Thirroul, which is south of Sydney. Yeah, it's like understanding the structures and then working out how to get all the little bits in between, so that there's that possibility of imagination and staying open and receptive. So yeah, there's loads of structures and things that get in the way. Sometimes they're helpful, but like, it's sort of like staying really true to my heart and listening. And I'm kind of glad you didn't say what's imagination, because I'll be thinking, oh my goodness. But I really like Hannah Arendt's work, and she talks about this thing like, it's so important to think without a banister. And she's got this kind of image of, those of you that might not know it, you know, like when we're just banister holding, we just stick with rules no matter what. And we don't really, if the rules change, and so we just stay with whatever the rules are, rather than kind of going, well, what are these and where did they come from and what do we do? And kind of understanding from the kind of critical work that I do with colleagues and in teams, it's understanding all these things, whether they be express rules or just structures, or, you know, normalizing particular things that really affect children and young people and others, so that kind of crush them in a way so that they can't be open to these experiences of imagining. So kind of like the criticality is so important. So I guess what I do is like try to look at how we keep open that criticality, so that there are these kind of opportunities for imagination. It's almost like what imagination isn't and what oppresses it tells us a lot about what imagination is, if that helps.
Yeah, and I think, like, to open it up quickly across Alan, Valerie and Karima to just sort of open floor for the three of you to jump in. And Tanitsuwa, if the internet is working, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, throw some comments in the chat room and we'll bring in your thoughts. But yeah, I kind of feel like, I think, you know, you're alluding to it a little bit, Alan, like, we're not far off in lots of ways. Like, I think we have a bunch of like solid bones to some patterns, and then we have some stuff which is pretty dated, which we've built on some pretty dated, you know, networks. And so working out what we're going to nudge to the side, and then what we're going to kind of meld together. So what are the areas or pressure points where you all see opportunities for like little leans in, or like little nudges which could really open up some space and some energy? What's the stuff that's really exciting you?
Happy to comment briefly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just one of the things, I totally agree, Jack. I think we know an awful lot. We've got some great ways of engaging with each other, with places, with challenges. I do think there are some forces that work against this. You know, again, back to the work of Ian McGilchrist, you know, he talks about how in his work, he's identified there's a kind of way that, for shorthand, left brain hemisphere tries to reproduce the world in its image, which is more technocratic. And I think that's a very powerful force. You know, why does the STEM agenda, you know, persevere when we have much better, much more holistic approaches? But another thing I'd like to put in is I do think imagination is a key kind of part of the route to empathy, and also to, you know, find ways to engage with the sublime. And I do think it's when we engage with things in a much richer way, we get a sense of something that moves us beyond our individualistic perspectives and culture, and really connects us deeply, both to each other and to our world. And I think, you know, when we're talking about climate crisis and gross inequity, you know, we need, you know, these multiple perspectives brought to bear, but also to engage with, as I say, you know, a sense of what's much greater than us, any of us individually. We do have great ways of doing that.
Yeah, and we're all, like, surely when you zoom out and look at the human journey, and then look at the journey of planet Earth, like billions of years before, and then I think we've got 6 odd billion years until the sun eats planet Earth, and so that's our sort of time zone to be small little blips of energy along that way. And I think so many of our patterns and our processes, they don't map us together in long time before, long time after. And when we are in that relational long time pattern, we start to go, okay, cool, well, let's work this energy current and let's try and work it together. So we're sort of moving and bumping into each other and passing on good energy. And sometimes the energy itself, like, which is the energy you kicked us off with, Karima, sorry, that energy gets us moving. And you can't see energy in a score sheet very often, you know, or in an annual report or on GDP. There's not many energy scores, but they're huge forces to get movement going. And I think, yeah, that imaginative capacity to wander yourself into a path, and then the energy to move, is something that's critical. So where do you get your energy from, Karima, as you're sort of navigating, you know, big spaces and big thinking?
Yes, thank you. I love how you opened the question, going back to the question by saying, before this question, you said, what are those openings? And that immediately, when you start looking for openings, is like a field of thought opens up. But what is extraordinary, and I go back to what Alan was saying, it's mutually rising. That field of thought that opens up, it's the heart that opens up also. It's mutually arising, it's mutually expanding. So we go back to the ecology of learning, of understanding. And we go back to something that is absolutely existential, which is love, which has completely been taken out of all discourse that we might hear in schools or in science or in research, or at least in most discourses. This is what we are finding here in our process in Morocco with the education system. We are hearing a language of compassion and love in the schools growing. And when we allow ourselves there, to go there, there is an extraordinary energy. And it's very, very simple. Because as if I am in an ecology of love, I do not have to prove my worth. I do not have to prove my value. There's the unconditionality. You are beautiful as you are. And that is extremely liberating, actually so liberating that freedom and imagination start running away in this field, whether we are no longer in the wrong and the right. We transcend that. So this is very much experience. I'm talking not about what we are witnessing. And when I say witnessing, it's not we observing, we are living ourselves in the schools, in the very governance structure of the education system in Morocco. We are starting to hear this language coming. Actually, the words, we are re-exploring the words. Those openings is about rediscovering the very words that we are using. It's extraordinary that some words come and they're translated. Like reform, to form anew, became in Arabic islah. But if you go to islah, it goes, the root verb is salaha, which means to reconciliate, to bring together, to go back to the trust.
Yeah, that those hugely powerful doorways into houses. I've got a colleague who works in a few different places as like a great friend, and she just started to put joy in as an indicator for like government building projects. And she works as a marine biologist using Indigenous to inform marine biology to help architectural and urban design. And she's got these government people saying, but how do we report back on joy? You know, we'll find a way. And I think when you start to go in through love and you start to find ways to you know, okay, imagination and what is this going to look like? And I, you know, I don't think it's cynical, but I think it's probably practical to say that when you feel like you're enough, you're less likely to buy a pair of running shoes every 6 months, and you're less likely to spend 8 hours on Facebook scrolling or one of the devices or one of those platforms feeling like you need more and more hits of dopamine because you're actually feeling satisfied, and you go and look at a tree and you go, wow, look at life. So I think there is a significant distraction economy which is working quite actively to make young people feel like they're not enough. And I think that's one of the things that hopefully, with all of this time where most of the devices are not allowed in a classroom, you've got space to be able to just help kids have roots in the ground and be connected to where they are and to each other, and have that foundation. We're going to run out of time, gang, but I'm really hoping that, yeah, this is a space for us to keep building these weaves. And Valerie, really excited to kickstart our project with you. So we're working with Valerie and quite a few other universities in Australia on taking AIME's imagination curriculum and seeing what it could do for schools across Australia and sort of exploring that. So yeah, Val, any final thoughts before we Valerie, any final thoughts before we wrap up the panel?
Yeah, we're really looking forward to it as well. And I'm part of a team on that. And I think that's part of it. You know, imagination is like working together as a team and kind of thinking through things so the unexpected can come out. And what do we do to enable that to happen? You know, the surprising, we can squash the surprising. So if we're not open, if you know what I mean. So that's great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Alan, Valerie and Karima, thanks so much for spending a small amount of time with us. And sorry we didn't have more time, but as I said, hopefully this is a long start of us weaving some circles together and seeing what we can do to keep mashing the work together. So thank you all for joining us on this first panel. And we're going to go to a short video with Dr. Jane Goodall and a close friend of mine, Professor Hope, who's a professor of imagination at our university, Imagination University, and then we'll come back with a new gang on the other side of the video. Dr. Jane Goodall, thank you for joining us on the interview to talk about the topic of imagination. And let's start there. What do you think imagination is?
I think I was really lucky because when I grew up all those years ago, there was no television, you know, so I read Dr. Dolittle, I read Tarzan, and that's what started my passion for going to Africa and living with animals. And my mother, you know, it was wartime and we didn't have much money at all. And one of the early Tarzan films came over. So Mom had saved up. It's a big treat to take me to see the film. And after about 10 minutes, I burst into tears. She had to take me out. She said, "Whatever's the matter?" And I said, "That isn't Tarzan." So I had imagined Tarzan. And today, I think one of the problems is young people, everything, every story, every book, everything is out there on television. So they don't have to use their imagination in the way that we did. They still do use their imagination, but imagination is so powerful. You imagine you're doing something, and that gives you a dream. And then you can work towards the dream. And it all starts with imagining what you might do, what you want to do.
what have been some of the things that have really lit up your imagination? Has there been one or two stories or things that you've seen people do that you've just been gobsmacked and jaw on the floor and inspired and astounded along the way?
Well, I mean, there's so many things that have inspired my imagination. And like I say, it started when I was a child with books. When I read the Dr. Dolittle books, with Gub Gub and Dab Dab and learning animal language from his parrot, my imagination was, I mean, I could see it all. It was so real. Imagination makes something that isn't real, real. And I think that's really important. And it can also take you into an amazing fantasy world. And I think, you know, the height of imagination must be books like The Lord of the Rings. I mean, that guy, Tolkien, he imagined an entire world. He imagined languages. He imagined something that when you read it is so real, you hardly need imagination because he's imagined it for you. But at the same time, your imagination puts you in that world.
A friend of mine is actually the professor of imagination at Imagination University, and I've stole a bit of his time. I wanted to have a quick chat at the top, but I might go and get Professor Hope and get him to come and have a quick chat to you if that's all right.
Okay.
All right, great to hang out with you. Thanks, Jane. Hey, Doc.
Hi there.
I'm Professor Hope. It's lovely to meet you.
Well, it's great to meet you, Professor Hope.
Look,
and hope is my guiding force. Everything I do is about hope.
Tell me more about that. Why?
Why? Because if we don't have hope, then that's the end. If you don't hope that what you're doing is going to make a difference, why bother to do it? And so many people today are losing hope. That it's making the world a very grim place. So I'm talking about reasons for hope. There's plenty of reasons for hope. Sort of it goes two ways. I mean, we do have to admit that a lot of things are going wrong. But at the same time, we have to be absolutely able to convince people that we can put them right. That's the hope.
And as I research imagination, what would you like me to dig into in the next 50 to 100 years?
Oh dear, well, that's a question I'd have to honestly ponder. That's not a very fair question to suddenly ask, is it? You turn it around. What do you most like to investigate in the next 50, 100 years?
I'd love to codify imagination. If I could do that in my body of work, if I could leave behind some tools, some ingredients, they might not be perfect, but they might be some stepping stones to say, hey, this is how you train imagination. This is how you test it. This is how you build it. If we could do that, I'd be happy to retire, and maybe I'll come hang out with you afterwards. Sorry, I thought that was going to throw just to Hope. So yeah, I then awkwardly just introduced myself doing interviews. So yeah, that's weird. Okay, let's keep this moving. We've got Ermin Duran who's going to jump in quickly and just share one of the messages from one of the guests we're going to have on the show with us. So Ermin is our head of impact based out of Nairobi in Kenya, and has had the good challenge of trying to wrap her head around the systems work that we're doing at scale and how the heck we put impact around some of this work. And do you want to jump in and just share one of the thoughts from one of the guests who's going to jump in but whose internet's playing up a bit?
Thank you, Jack. Hello, everyone. I am very happy and honored just to read a little intro from Tanatsiwa, who's in Zimbabwe right now. And unfortunately, her internet connection is really troublesome and hasn't allowed her to say the things that she wanted to say and to join the rest of the panel. So we are coming in with an imaginative, not really, but imaginative way of getting her message across to you. So Tanatsiwa says, hi, everyone. My name is Tanatsiwa Christopher Dube, and I am 17 years old from Zimbabwe. I am a singer, a dancer, an author, and a calligrapher. For me, imagination is life. It is freeing your mind. If we look even closer, imagination is the world that we live in, the world that we create. Sometimes I myself wish that I had the imagination of a small child. A child does not think too much about the hardships of life, rather builds a world that he or she wants to see. When I was young, I was a child that could not openly express my emotions. Instead, I could write, draw, and dance about it for hours, letting my mind run wild on paper and in my moves. And if we did not have imagination, paintings would not have been painted, music would not have been composed, choreographies would not have been created, stories would not have been told. Communication is the most important thing in my life, a goal that I believe in. Imagination is a form of communication that can connect our world as a whole. And just to say that Tanansiwa was one of the first graduates of last year at the age of I'm learning from my own personally journey with imagination. Thank you very much, Tanansiwa.
Awesome, thank you, Ermin. I think as the internet mashed itself together by bouncing up into satellites and into different areas, I think you might have been saying that Tanansiwa was one of the first graduates from Imagination University. So we caught that as well. All right, let's jump into our next panel. Amna, have we got you there? And if we do, I'd love to ask a question around how does thought start for human beings? Because I have an assumption that I think imagination is maybe the beginning of human thought, but I don't know, maybe it's not. What do you think?
Just to make sure you're asking me, right?
I am asking you, yeah, and tell us a little bit about
okay.
yourself. Thanks for
yeah, I just wanted to make sure. So could you just repeat the question once more? Once I'm just figuring out whether it's for me or not.
Do you think imagination is like the beginning of human thought? Is that sort of where thinking starts, or where does it sit? You know, how do we activate it?
I think like if we would not have imagination, we couldn't really do anything. So it does really start when we're talking about us as humans and whatever we've done and the revolutions that we've gone through. If it hadn't been for imagination, yes, we wouldn't have even thought of the things that we could do and the potential that we had as human beings. And the first Homo sapiens wouldn't have evolved if it hadn't been for imagination. So I think it's really a fundamental concept for us as humans to have imagination, to look for things that are not here today in the world and build our own narratives around it. So I think that imagination plays a really important role in how we look at the world and how we build our own future as well.
And Pavel, tell us a little bit about your world and the lens you're looking through, and tell us, where does imagination sit in worlds of schooling, and is it a missing word? Like I can't seem to find it, in a lot of the teaching pedagogy or some of the structures. So where has this word wandered off to?
Yeah, hello everyone. Well, actually, I wanted maybe to chime in with a little bit darker note here. As this meeting started, there were several military helicopters hovering right above my house. And as you know, I'm currently in Russia, and there is a situation right now, the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, which is a huge devastation for part of Europe and big tragedy for our societies. And when I'm reflecting on the history of the humankind, wars have been a massive driver of, let's say it was seen partially as a vehicle of human evolution. They were launched not only to, of course, there was like a violent component, but there was also a praise in wars. We praise war heroes. We praise glorified nations that rule over other nations. And I think most of our countries have anthems that have some kind of words stating that we are better than others, we rule over them, and so on and so on. And when I'm thinking about a possibility that imagination brings to us, I'm thinking of imagining a world that doesn't require wars at all. What is that possible future where we can, all of our societies can live peacefully, where we can embrace our differences without need to suppress one another? And what do we need to learn to actually become that kind of species that doesn't require violence to evolve? And can that be one of key contributions of our imagination capacity to help us evolve as a species, to not destroy each other, not destroy our planet, not being exploitive in our relationship with reality, but rather being co-creative? And that is the future I'm imagining is possible. I think, and speaking of Jane Goodall's words of hope, my hope is that in the next 50 to 100 years, we'll not only create new and beautiful things or discover ways to travel to other planets, but we will also learn to coexist with one another and with all other species on this planet in a peaceful and harmonious way. And that's, I think, is the greatest ability of imagination, to really create worlds and make them real, worlds that are better worlds, that are more harmonious, more loving, more empathic. So it's not only possible for little groups where we can kind of elevate that consciousness, but really, let's say, spread it across the planet and really see how we can become a vehicle of, or not a vehicle, it's a little passivizing, I think, agents of that planetary scale evolution. And going back to education, I just maybe one last statement. Going back in education is how, let's imagine how we can design education with that attitude in mind. That certainly wouldn't be about, let's say, basic literacy. It would be about empathy, love, support, collaboration, co-creation, learning each other's languages, and so on and so on. So it's a different model of education, and that's what I suggest we need to embrace. The time is now, I think.
Big time, and I think it's important. Like I'm sure, like many of the people that are in the show today that we're working through, like we've spent our fair share of time in Want to Change the World conferences. You know, I've been doing this thing for 20 years and started it when I was 19 and started trying to organize change when I was 17. And, you know, over the course of the last 20 years, like there's always that point in certain gatherings where it's like, oh, we just need to change our system, or we just need to do this, or we just need, and everyone cheers. And then there's like, yeah, but there's wars, and there's oil being sold, and there's mass manipulation, and there's these like 2 or 3 platforms that have 3 billion people on them that are just trying to munch advertising down people's minds and distract everybody from connecting to each other. And there's some pretty serious tension. So when I think we get into that, like Pavel, I think one of the things which I think is we have to be considering the economic patterns of what we're valuing, and we have to be thinking about national economies, global economies. And when we look at a systems lens and we start looking systemically across all of our patterns, and we look at the biggest possible view, which is one of the things that Jane passed on to me and a number of people have over time, like we have to look at it as 7 billion plus people, or sorry, close to 7 billion people. We have to look at it as hundreds of billions of other species, and we have to look at long time afterwards and long time before to get the best chance of potentially designing anything. Otherwise, we're just designing one tiny little, coloring in bit of a huge pattern. But within that, then it becomes super exciting and interesting. And Francois is going to join us in the next panel through into the chat. Maybe we could hack national anthems as part of the challenge over the decade, and give people a chance to put peaceful and imaginative, loving, takes on national anthems. And one of the, so I'll sort of come back to you, I think, on this, and Amna jump in as well. And after I just sort of share this thought, but one of the things which we've been studying and I've been told a lot is, so back here, like in Australia, we have, with our Indigenous systems, we have 60,000 years of continuous life that's been maintained. That's the longest continuous surviving culture on planet Earth. And it's been through smart patterns of relations between each other, nature, tomorrow, and that's as complex and as simple as it gets when you distill it. And part of what we've lost is our economic relationship to nature, and our economic relationship to each other, and our economic relationship to tomorrow. So I think when you start to center nature economically and you start to center relations and not necessarily the transactions, then we've got ourselves a ball game. And one of the potential heroes for all this stuff is maybe automation is going to rush us towards a world where we don't need to work. And that is a serious possibility in the next 50 to 100 years. And, you know, if you're looking at different platforms for what school looks like, school was designed for people to go to work, and maybe with all the robots, it's like, all right, well, what are the jobs we're going to do if all these robots are munching up our jobs? So I think that bringing in those other elements are critical to us thinking systemically about it. So Pavel, if you want to bounce back off that thought, and just let me know what you think.
Yeah, I think the economic dimension is absolutely crucial. So I think it's sort of connecting the imagination and realization of that imagination in material world. And that's where the tension, I think, is constantly, is like learning to evolve ourselves into space of possible and going to, again, to spaces of what is real and again, creating the next stage of possibility. And here, I think one of the possibilities, just one last sentence I want to say, is transiting the idea that military industrial complex should be the heart of our economies, which has been for 200 years. And that was what science has served and what education has served. And now I think we need to learn to create, if I use this word correctly, industries of peace, where peacemaking, peace building becomes the, let's say, the central pattern in our civilization, including economy, and where we regenerate rather than exploit. And that I think is a huge learning for all of us ahead.
And tell us a little bit about what you got up to with your online platform that you created during the pandemic.
Yeah. For me, when I started off with, education here in Pakistan, it was like we're always told to be like limited into this sort of in the box thinking, not having access to the practical tools and resources to actually explore fields. And especially as a girl, I was always told by my community that STEM fields aren't meant for girls, and discouraged basically in going into a field which is only considered for boys. So over here in Pakistan, it's considered that if you want to build a career, you can either become a teacher if the financial condition of your family is not good. Otherwise, the only option you have is becoming a housewife, and child marriages are so prevalent here in Pakistan. And only 23% of girls complete high school level. So the situation is so alarming. And for me, when the pandemic gave me the opportunity to explore the online world, like I was a person who never knew what a URL was. And just exploring the concept of digital literacy when it was non-existent at my school, and exploring new fields that I could never have the opportunity to explore if I were to be in the traditional conventional mode of learning here in Pakistan. I was able to just, open this sort of door that I never knew was there, and just believe that I do have the potential and the talent to do something in this world. So that just gave me the motivation to imagine, I would say, and build my own future. When I started off, this was something that, because it was a new experience to me, I kept on learning, kept on doing new online courses, and kept on exploring how different the system of education is in other developed countries as compared to my country. And all of those experiences, those exposures made me realize that there's so much out there that I can do. And there are so many opportunities, but the girls over here in Pakistan, they have so much potential, but it's untapped. It's hidden. And if we were to just tap into that potential, and how much change we can make and how much progress can Pakistan as a country make. So I wanted to do something as a young person myself with the resources I had to do something for my community, especially for the girls that are in rural parts of Pakistan, where child marriages is more prevalent and there are not even, secondary and high schools developed and built in villages. So I started off with hosting workshops and events and sessions aimed at empowering these girls to, just continue their education because they would drop out to help out at their home because of poverty levels, and it would be so difficult to reach physical school. So I wanted to create a platform where everyone, regardless of their economic situation, and could connect, could learn, could explore, and just imagine, I would say. So like going through it, iterating a lot, I from organizing workshops to now developing a more accessible platform for girls. What I've learned through my journey is that when you give someone the opportunity to just explore and find out what they've been sent for, what's their purpose in this world, I think we can bring in so much change. But just that first opportunity, I think that's all it takes. Because for me, that one online course changed my mindset, changed everything, and just opened that door that I had locked years ago of imagining and building and exploring. So yeah, that's what I do. In terms of the technical aspect, yes, so I lead this initiative called BlueMed, where we work with girls here in Pakistan and have now expanded globally to reach girls with accessible STEM programming and give them the skills to build a future in STEM careers, because it's important for women and girls to not only have their own future and not be like dependent on someone else, because here in Pakistan I've seen firsthand seen how difficult it is growing up as a girl. So I'm on a mission to just leave the world as a better place for girls so that they don't have to go through the same challenges that I had to go through growing up. Thank you.
It's a very impressive way to spend. How old are you at the moment?
I'm 16 and I started when I was 14.
Good. Okay. Well, if you do that every 2 years, then the world's going to be sweet. Like, that's awesome. Oh, good on you, and thank you. It's scary to push yourself into places where you think you can change things, and I think it's all power and strength to you, and we'll be alongside you in whatever way we can as a group of people as we try and navigate and move together. So sending you lots of energy for the work ahead. And we'll jump quickly over to Nia if we've got you there. Nia, can you tell us a little bit about your project? And apologies, we're running a little bit short on over time because there's 1,000 people to talk to about all this wonderful work, but hopefully we'll get to introduce everybody and then get moving through. And what we're going to try and do after this is pull together a really simple website as a blog for us all for this Imagination project to start putting together some of the dreams and ideas and start working ourselves towards the Learning Planet Festival next year. And then each year we can start to work those beats and see what we can bring back and use that Learning Planet Festival as a lever to sort of bring those challenges together. So we'll get towards there. But Nia, if we've got you and the internet's working, tell us as succinctly as you can, with the best energy you can, with the most complexity you can, about some of the work you're working through.
I'll keep it short and sweet because people have said such amazing things. So I'm Nia. I'm a big kid who's intentionally clung on to my imagination, a mama and an educator. And I guess I'm really just passionate about like looking at what the barriers to imagination are in school. I work with young adults who are just, like everyone said, have so much potential and so many ideas, but there's a lot of, their imagination is suppressed. I guess I don't think it's something that ever dies or leaves you, but it can just be stifled and suppressed. So just really running some experiments in my school alongside my students and with them to see, what are the conditions that imagination can thrive in, and, what can we do when it does? And yeah, I think, we're just viewing imagination in its simplest forms as playing with possibility. And I think what we've come to understand so far is, why it's such a difficulty in school is because I think someone mentioned before, people like to know what the outcomes are going to be and have everything planned in advance. And there's very little space for students to just be and for, the process of emergence to take place. So yeah, we're just experimenting with how we can do that more in schools, and maybe create a dedicated kind of change studio for that is all about bringing people together to play with possibility. So
yeah, I wonder if I remember like school principals saying to us, especially early on, as we'd sort of get a big bunch of kids to come out of school for a period of time, and then we'd build a pop-up imagination factory for them to come hang out of on university campuses, and then we're about to open our own physical imagination factory out of Sydney, and we're sort of doing that all around the world now. But they'd say, oh, well, kids can't go out of class, like, you know, they'll miss out on their learning. I'm like, well, yeah, but if a kid's sitting there in class and they don't want to be there, and then how engaged or how productive is the learning experience going to be? But if they come back with feeling relevance to learning and feeling their energy up, then doesn't that mean they're going to have, you know, like more energy for what they're taking on? So maybe there's something we could start to explore around the energy currents, where just a really simple energy, you know, how's the vibes, like how are you feeling after doing that? Or you go and do PE or sport, does that give you energy? Or, you know, if you have some time or you got some space to explore with your mind, it is totally fluid, like our states of being. So you can, I'm looking at a painting that I've done behind this, behind the camera. That painting, like, still makes no sense to me. I did it 2 years ago and just dropped it off at a friend's house. But what it's given me is it gives me a pathway for energy to move. And then over time, like, it allows you to open these doors, which you can't access consciously and you can't access logically. And that training and that process, I think, is it's how we can value that. And so we make space for it. Not necessarily box it, like Alice trying to get out of the keyhole to get into Wonderland or whatever. Like, it's, the point isn't to necessarily find the key or fit it perfectly. It's just to make the space that you can go wandering.
Yeah, I think that's it. It's like, that's how we've been looking at it. It's energy, and like energy doesn't die. It just, you know, changes shape, or, you know, something stops it from flowing. And it's really been like, it's not about finding their keys. It's about understanding imagination as the key to so many different doors. You know, like people have mentioned empathy, you know, possibility, ideas. And I think that key is energy. It's an energy flow. So like, what are the conditions we need to create to let that energy flow, you know? And I've worked with so many students who, you know, might be like, oh, I'm not very good at imagination, or I'm not creative. We hear that heaps, and, you know, but when the conditions are there, they're amazingly imaginative. And so I would love to explore it as an energy.
Yeah, awesome. Maybe it's something we can kind of wander through together. So thanks for spending a little bit of time with us. And I think, like, one of the distinctions, like the movement of creativity in education is critical, and it also creates this sense of like, well, I'm not an artist, or I'm not a musician. So you kind of, but imagination, it's harder for people to be like, no, I don't have an imagination. Like, no, you fundamentally do, you know. And so I think as a word to work on, you know, that is something that we can kind of find more commonality across every culture, and as a species, something we share together. So thanks for spending a bit of time with us. I'm just going to jump over quickly to Vishal, if you're there, and tell us, how do we dream a dream? And tell us a little bit about your work.
Sure, Jack. I've just been taking in everything that's been shared so beautifully so far. Our work is based in India, focused on helping every child thrive. And we chose the language of thrive very intentionally, primarily coming from the principles of equity, inclusion, and dignity. If you've ever been to India or lived in India, you do recognize that society is not shaped or designed equitably. It's not inclusive and does not treat every human being the same because of our class and caste system. And education itself is designed like that. Even education is designed to exclude, is designed to create hierarchies. So we had to then imagine first a society which is inclusive, which believes in ideas of respect and dignity, and which is equitable. So then what is it that we need to create as an experience for children today, so that they're able to shape society 30 years from now on the principles of equity, dignity, and inclusion? Which means we had to break into this notion of what does success mean? Today, success is defined as success in education, where you get a rank, where you get academic success, you get a job, you earn an income, you get out of poverty. In the way society is designed, that's not possible for all kids that come into the school system, which means there'll only be the top 15% who will be able to succeed from education, and nearly 80 to 85% don't succeed. But if you redefine and reimagine the idea of success to be thriving, and thriving is an expanded understanding of, do I have access to healthy relationships? Do I have access to learning opportunities for life? Do I have access to my human rights? Do I have access to public spaces to thrive? Do I have access to be an active and good citizen? Do I have access to a healthy planet around me? Do I have a sense of self-identity and self-awareness and self-esteem? Am I able to contribute back to society? Then every child has the ability and the potential to succeed in their own way, because they define their own success. Success is not defined very narrowly as just income and wealth, but is an expanded notion of success. I'm leading a thriving life. And when I am thriving, I'm able to help my family thrive. I'm able to help my community thrive, and I'm able to help my planet thrive. So it's that imagination of what success would look like, which then contributes to a whole imagination of what society could look like. And that's at the core of our work. Now, in order to do that, we obviously have to create spaces of learning. Unlearning not just in young people on their own notions of what education is for, but also amongst teachers and parents and school leaders and policymakers and decision makers of education. Move away from this thinking of the industrialized education model that we've got, and to a thriving education model. So that's what we're working on. We've been working for the last 22 years, work across India, reaching out to about 3 million kids. And in that journey, helping each child define or imagine their own future for themselves, or dream their own future for themselves.
I love the casual reflection on 20 odd years of work as well at the end of it. The relations are the key, aren't they? I think, Vishal, like as you we kind of, I think when we think about relations, like when you're in good relations with each other and good relations with nature and the world around you, then that's the investment, that's success, and then you start to build these patterns afterwards to keep score. But that's what I was sort of hearing in that thriving energy, is working out how we can put that focus on the relations, on how healthily we are engaged with the people around us and with the world around us and with ourselves. And then that gives those anchor points to, I've been looking at trees a lot and just sort of how the trees stand up, and they've just got these amazing rich root systems, and that allows them to bend and move in all these different ways. And for human beings to be able to dance and move like trees, like we've got to look after those roots and look after those relations and those connections. So,
and trees have this, what we learn from trees, so beautifully you said it, is also to learn to pause, to be still. And one of the things I feel we as humans have forgotten is our ability to be still. Because it's in the stillness, it's in those moments of stillness when imagination is most activated. When we reconnect with our most innermost feelings, is where imagination gets activated.
Which is the opposite of preparing for a life of work. Because when you're taught to work, you learn to overwork, and then you never give yourself space. And we design patterns to talk about the self and talk about this individual student and everybody having an individual voice to then be an individual hero. And you forget that there's lots and lots of us that we've all got to make space for. So sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to stand still and give energy for people to move past you and around you, and like nature does so effectively.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, thank you for spending some time with us. I know it's only short today, but we're really excited to keep hatching everyone together as we move through. And thanks to the panel for kicking it with us, to yourself, Vishal, to Emna, to Nia, to Pavel for spending a bit of time with us. I'm really excited to see some of the ideas that have emerged from this. And one of the things that we've worked pretty hard on over the last 18 years is following up on talk. So any of the ideas that are germinating there, I think we should, put them all to life and see what we can do. So we'll be stoked to work with everyone to help bring some of this stuff to life. So thanks for spending some time with us. And we're going to throw to a quick video, and then we've got our last panel. We're running slightly over the time of what we thought this show was going to finish 15 minutes ago. So if anyone on the last panel just has to leave, then that's okay. We'll do another one, and we'll come back. But otherwise, hopefully, if you've got a bit more time, we'll be able to catch up with you after this video, and we'll keep rolling. Now, Einstein once said that imagination is more important than knowledge. He also said that we're never going to be able to solve the problems of tomorrow with the same level of thinking that got us here today. Now, when we're looking at 49% of jobs potentially being under critical threat in the US in the next 10 to 20 years through automation, when we think about what the world looks like in the next 10 to 20 years, I can't fathom a world without imagination at the core. And this current moment is showing huge disruption across all of our fields of business, enterprise, education, health. And as we gather, we're going to have to think about how we can do things differently. And I believe imagination will be a critical source to that.
So what led me to it was working with groups of amazing high school students from places around the southeast Queensland area. And they were mostly from backgrounds which would be labelled disadvantaged, they were disaffected, all those sorts of labels that apply to kids who were drawn from formal schooling in a great way. But they were taking part in a research project with real enthusiasm, real commitment. And I wanted to know why, because this was about education. They were looking at reasons mainly why kids from their schools didn't get to university. And so these groups of students and their commitment was a fascinating thing to research. And what they basically told me was that they needed to be involved in something that was really meaningful to them. And that meaning was to do with their friends, their family, their community, not just for themselves. If schooling was going to be worthwhile, it wasn't for them, wasn't for the future, because tomorrow, who cares? Today's the thing you've got to get through with all its difficulties. But if they could do something that would help with their family lives, their community, then that made it worthwhile. And that's that empathic imagination, seeing through things through other people's eyes.
It's interesting, my background before the media stuff I did was in mainly mathematics, and people tend to think of mathematics as very cold, hard, logical, there's the answer, go and find it. They don't realise that it's actually a really creative, really imaginative, dynamic way of thinking. The sort of stuff that mathematicians do, what they're doing at the moment with this COVID virus, of taking all this data, looking at problems, trying to map out where it's going, what do we do as a society? There's incredible creativity and imagination laid into those sort of things. So I've always been lucky with the mathematics I've done, and then the comedy and performance things like that, which are all about creativity. I've really felt lucky that creativity and firing up my own imagination's always played a big part in the stuff I've been doing. Yeah, look, from the earliest of days, I can remember when I was playing with a group of my mates as kids, I'd be the one having the, hey, hold it, but what? Let's pretend we're on a spaceship, and I would be the one having these completely that they thought made no sense ideas. Because as far as I was concerned, if you're playing in a park with some mates, that can be anything you want it to be. The only restrictions on what you allow, the restrictions you yourself put on letting your imagination flow. And it's an interesting time these days where a lot of the time people take all their instruction and stimulation. One of my daughters who's at home from school at the moment is struggling 2 hours in to what could be several months, has just hit the wall with boredom, because she hasn't grown up in a way where she's constantly firing her own imagination and exploring those things. And one of the things I think I'm going to make her do over the next little while is look beyond the parameters of what you instantly think you should do or where you are or how you should behave, and explore that imaginative side.
All right, Steph, Beck, what's your 9 to 5 training program for the kids out there on imagination?
9 to 5, the first thing I came up with was, as soon as you wake up in the morning, be creative. So whether you're painting, drawing, singing, just something in that first instance when you wake up in the morning.
Excellent. Derek, what have we got on your training agenda? I assume it'll have some form to it, hopefully research backed.
Well, I think because we're all being self-isolated, the kids will be away from school a lot and in their own homes, and to look at everything that's in your home and reimagine how it can be used. What can you do differently with things? And make lists and lists and lists of the various things you can do with books, with anything that's around, light switches, the whole lot.
I love that idea. Spence, what have you got?
I love that. You stole that of mine, Derek. One of my things was, use 3 things in the house in a completely different way to the way they're normally used. I've got 3 others. Invent a new board game. Either grab a game you've already got and change the rules a bit, grab a couple of games and put them together so we can invent a new game. Find a favourite story, some kid's book you've got around the house, one of those nice simple stories that builds up. Give it a completely new ending. And a final one, if we're going to be brave, lunch. Create a completely new meal. Take the ingredients you've got in the fridge, put them in a way together that's never been seen before. This is a high-risk activity. This could turn out absolutely awful, or you may make yourself famous for life when you invent the Spence burger.
Okay, we've got our last gathering of people that we're hanging out with for today's show as we spark this sort of imagination lab to bring people together and really see if we can enhance some of the work of what's been moving around. So as we move through the next group of people, I'd love to hear from Ragda if you're there. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your work and the fuel that has kept your imagination alive? I think NASA came out with a study that it was like 97% of 5-year-olds have a genius level imagination, and it was like 3% of 35-year-olds. So what's keeping the imagination alive inside of you, and what's sort of fueling your work? So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks. I'm super inspired, Jack, by this circle of people, and I'm imagining what if more and more minds come together discussing this topic. Personally, I come from the Middle East, and imagination has been a big part of our culture, the storytelling, really imagining what is beyond in the desert outside there. And I have like a little colleague here. So in the idea that imagination, as Muhammad Ali himself said, a man without imagination is a man without wings. In my work in Masterpiece for the past 11 years that we are existing in the peace building realm and working on with grassroots youth organizations around the world, especially as part of education, we see that the extracurricular activities, what is called outside of the classroom activities, gave so much imagination, gave so much role to students to actually play with their imagination, get to stimulate their ideas. If they are decision makers themselves, if they are the president of the country, if they are the astronauts, and they are, of course, the future of our world. And our work is really about establishing the self-confidence, especially with the youngsters, to work their imagination. And the amount of ideas, insights, decisions, recommendations that youngsters come up with is actually quite impressive. It's so much, like more hands-on, very connected to their communities, connected to their ambitions, very imaginative of a better world that we all can live in. We're always impressed. And whenever we bring these recommendations to decision makers around the world, that's wow, that thanks to these conversations, I would say that imagination is life. Our vulnerable species
couldn't actually survive without imagination. Every invention we have, every idea we have started as an imagination in the mind of the universe, in our mind. So it's we cannot distinguish between human history without imagination. So yeah, that's kind of a wrap up with our work, but also our belief that everyone, we have 7 billion imaginations, and this is what will give us hope for a better world, for sure.
Yeah, it's I think when you have that that space for young people, and particularly young people that are being pushed outside the margins systemically, I'm of the absolute fundamental belief that the biggest source of human intelligence that is yet to be tapped into is sitting outside the margins. And, you know, we designed off the back of 3 to 4 colonial empires over the last 3 to 4 centuries. We've designed these patterns for such a small group of people to design the systems and the way we shape value, and the way we shape economics, the way we shape our schooling systems. And now we're starting to see in the last century or so, you know, waves of people from outside the margins have pathways into, you know, the mainstream systems. And I think the most exciting part is, like, humanity is facing a number of different pressure points where we actually need imaginative thinking. And if we're going to go to the labs are not at MIT. They're sitting in places where people are on these calls right now, and they're there. Like, the intelligence is already there. We just haven't plugged it into the system. And that's not a huge body of work. That's what sort of provides a lot of excitement, I suppose, for me, and a lot of hope in the work that we're doing. And if you want to be hopeful, I agree with you, Ragda. Like, you kind of, you know, you hang out with some young people who are like, yeah, challenges, but, you know, here's some stuff we can do. And if you want to feel like dismay, you watch the news, or you sit there and scroll some of those platforms that design us to make us feel afraid, you know, and then intimidated, so we don't go and buy something. I'm going to jump over to Kekeshan, who's been up nice and early in the morning. Kekeshan, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? And apologies if I have mispronounced your name.
Thank you, Jack. And no, you were pretty good with my name. My name is Kekesha. I am a United Nations human rights champion and the founder president of Green Hope Foundation, which is a global social innovation enterprise that works across 26 countries with over 300,000 people. And we use education for sustainable development as a transformative tool to engage and educate people, especially young people, to become change makers in their own spheres of influence. And when we speak about sustainable development, we really address all 3 pillars of sustainability: the economy, society, and the environment. And we firmly believe that young people do have that power to drive this change towards a more sustainable and equitable world. So for us at Green Hope Foundation, imagination has always been at the core of what we do, both in our work and how we were founded. So I started my journey in the field of sustainability at the age of 7 when I saw the image of a dead bird with its belly full of plastic. And my first thought was, what can I do to solve this problem? What is the smallest action that I can take? And my thought and my action then was to plant my first tree on my 8th birthday, which is also World Environment Day, 5th June. So I thought, and I imagined that it was my duty, like I'd been sent to this earth with the mission to really create a better world for all, to become an eco warrior. Now, at the age of 9, I, with my parents, attended a walk for water that was done to raise awareness about how people around the world face this water insecurity. And I remember telling my mom then that I want to do something to be able to stop this inequality, to stop all of these insecurities that exist in the world. Now, fast forward a few more years, at the age of 12, I was one of the youngest delegates at the largest sustainable development conference of the time, Rio Plus 20 in Brazil. And out of the 50,000 delegates there, I realized that there were only 5 people under the age of 18. So again, I wanted to do something to really address this lack of inclusivity. And that is how Green Hope Foundation came about. I founded Green Hope Foundation to really address all of these issues that exist using education for sustainable development as the tool. So now we at Green Hope Foundation, we harness the potential that young people have all across the world. The water example that I gave now, we have deep bore tube wells, toilets all across the world in all our 26 country chapters to address those issues. The schools that we work with, or as official education partners, we engage the children in outdoor learning, creative learning, to really provide them with that, to allow them to really imagine what they can do for a better world and for a better future. And really what we have seen is that by allowing them to imagine what they can do, that really allows them to take action, and that action gives them hope for the future. And that is why we are called Green Hope Foundation, because we're all about ensuring that every single person really is able to chart their own path of success, chart their own way in life, fulfill their own destiny, and at the same time give back to their community and to like the planet as well. And very quickly, because I know that you're running out of time, one example I'll give is in our environmental education fields. So I mentioned we use outdoor learning, and I'll give the example of Toronto, Canada, where I'm from. A lot of the children here, although we have the largest ravine system, the only urban ravine system in the world, the children really don't know about that or why it's important or what its significance is. So as official environmental education partners of the Toronto District School Board, we ensure that the children know about this. We take them on outdoor field trips, on cleanups, on research trips, and it starts like right at the elementary school level. So these children grow up literally with the imagination of what they can do to spread awareness about how they can protect this unique urban ravine system, what they can do to protect it. And now, like 10 years after we returned 10 this year, 10 years after we started Green Hope Foundation, these children are now adults who are taking actions in their own spheres of influence, who have that empathy for people and planet just because they were able to have the freedom to imagine when they were young. And that is really what we seek to do at Green Hope Foundation.
And there are almost two anchor points, I reckon, that you think like there's sort of imagining, and then there's that relationship with nature. And I think that's, at our essence, when we're at our best, we're a custodial species. We're in relation to nature, and we're conscious that, okay, cool, we've inherited a life and we're here for a short amount of time, but for the most part, Earth's going to be here after we've had our time, unless there's some remarkable, 6 billion years of human life, which there might be. But to get there, we're going to have to definitely find a way to be much more custodial in relation and listening to nature and moving with nature. And that's what's super cool, I think, about the knowledge that already exists. Like, I think where my mum's family's family line of our Aboriginality and our Indigenous background from my family, like there's just so much knowledge already here through our Indigenous patterns, through our custodial ways that we've sort of already existed within, which unlock things like that. And it's super cool to see how you've done that in weaves in cities and in urban environments as well, because taking on that custodial mindset is something that we can do if we see a bird filled with plastic and just go, okay, cool, let's work out how it can move in those relations. I'll share a quick story with you. So we're in the process of trying to design a new country for the world, so called IMAGI-NATION. And it's been a really gnarly trip to work out, and we want to set up an alternative to some of those major social network platforms, because I think part of the challenge is how we network. But then having this platform for the world to come together, imagine, and then get to work. And we were trying to work out what the governance system would be for a new country. And we were kind of like, okay, well, we thought it was elders and borrowing from our Indigenous systems patterns and thinking, okay, you respect your elders. But eventually there's flaws with human beings. So we were like, it's nature. And so if we can center 10, indicator species or 10 custodial species, then every person that comes into imagination has a relationship with nature. And over the time of our 10 years of our network, we're going to try and see if we can, all the knowledge that we acquire, we actually gift it back to nature. And then I think imagination works, which is sort of a really interesting intersection, like nature and imagination kind of fusing together.
For sure, yeah. And I think that as human beings, it's really we've been disconnected from nature for such a long time with very few people. Of course, our indigenous peoples, our local peoples have remained connected to that. And it's really time for us to, as all of us, really reconnect with nature. And that'll actually allow us to address the intersections of our own human race and how we as a human species are all connected with one another. So yeah, again, that's something we work to do tirelessly at Green Hope Foundation. And yes, so there's so many challenges that exist with like really rigid mindsets, but we've seen over the last decade that it is possible to bring about that change.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'll at some point pick your brains as to how you keep going, because yeah, after 20 years of sort of doing this, there's plenty of times when you start something when you're young and trying to keep your perspective and keep that hope going and keep that energy going. So good on you for getting up every day and bringing that energy. I know it's not easy to do that. We're going to jump over quickly to Mahim to see, Mahim, what you're working on and the project you're working on at the moment, and then we'll bounce to a couple of other special guests we have, and then we'll wrap up what's been a really rich labs gathering around imagination to spark some energy, and then more and more action for us to weave together. So Mahim, have we got you there?
Hi, so I'm Mahim. I'm from Bangladesh. So whenever I thought about this concept called imagination, I always think about my childhood, when my mom taught me how to read and write, and at the same time, as I was a child who used to live with his grandparents because my parents used to work in different cities. So I got a very good friend, and that is books. So that time the books did not have such imaginary or images in it. So I had to imagine the all scener settings the book is telling us. So I think that's the time when I imagined to have something that does not exist. At the same time, all through my life, I try to connect different sectors of knowledge, what we call that interdisciplinary field of knowledge. So always I thought that why should we consider knowledge as some sectors instead of let's just connect different bunch of things together to have more impact and to do something that has not done before. So as a student and as a citizen of underdeveloped countries, all of a sudden I personally fall a victim to educational inequity. And soon, instead of just being a victim, I started to just analyze the problem deeply. And I found out that the concept of educational inequity is not properly described. There are two different forms of educational inequity. Some things, only one form of educational inequity is that not all kids have the access to education. But there are kids in the school but can't achieve their learning outcomes. And there are statistics that shows us the same thing. UNICEF declares that almost 670 million children around the world are unable to reach the minimum proficiency level in reading and mathematics, even though 2/3 of them are in school. So both school-going kids and non-school going kids are suffering from different forms of same problem, the educational inequity. So my previous experience on interdisciplinary field and my personal experience on of being a victim to educational inequity, I tried to design a solution during the pandemic when I first came to know about AIME and Imagination University. So I have founded a foundation called Edu Writers Foundation, which you can see at the, as my virtual background. So we tell it that let all children do. So we emphasize to all, including school-going kids and non-school-going kids, including children who come from a wealthy background and who don't come from a wealthy background. So we tell that let us build a foundation, which will be a foundation of the children, by the children, and for the children. So Edu Writers Foundation is now working to tackle educational inequity and provide maximum number of kids with quality education. And we imagine to have a full free education system throughout the world, where education will not be measured by household income, by financial status, and by some other privileges. And we And I think it is the time to reimagine the definition of education. Instead of thinking education as a bunch of information and some tactics or strategy, let us imagine education as a big puzzle. And each of us have different pieces of that puzzle. So if we connect all people together and they can share their puzzle pieces, and then we can solve the whole puzzle. And that's how we can scale up our consciousness and the understanding on the natural world. So we are working to elevate and eradicate education inequity, both for school-going kids and non-school-going kids. And in the journey, we have found out that in Bangladesh, there are lots of high-educated housewives who can't contribute to society for lackage of technical support. So we are inspiring and empowering those high-educated housewives, our mothers, to come forward and help us to help maximum number of kids receive quality education. So I imagine, and at Edurators Foundation, we imagine that one day each and every child will receive quality education without paying a penny. So last of all, and throughout this journey, I have learned one thing, that change starts from what we have and ends with what we need. And humans themselves are the greatest resource of this human civilization. So let us utilize ourselves to our maximum potential, and then we can solve any problem together. Thank you.
I love the puzzle piece framework, because it's just such a beautiful metaphor and device to think about how we're all in relation, and then how that knowledge transference. I often think that maybe being a mentor is like the ultimate calling of humanity, because in essence your job is to pass on knowledge. And Adam Smith, who wrote Wealth of Nations, like there's a section in Wealth of Nations where he talks about the way commodities are broken into profit, and there's a section around labor, and in the section around labor he talks about secrets of the trade. So if, like, the cloth maker, his example is, if the cloth maker works out how to dye the cloth purple, then if that cloth maker can keep that secret of how they do it for 50% cheaper than their competitors in the family for like 3-4 generations, they can make more profits. Now that is taking one puzzle piece and taking the puzzle piece off the table. It's saying, see you later, we're not playing the game, we're just going to sit over here, we're not going to. But if you put the puzzle piece back in, what Smith doesn't talk about is what we get rewarded with in relations, which you can't measure immediately. So maybe there's actually value in that, purple cloth dyeing person going, oh, sweet, I'm going to pass on the knowledge and be a mentor and a teacher and be revered in my society. And maybe I won't make money immediately, but maybe I'll have a great funeral, and maybe my family will be looked after, and maybe I'll be loved all my life. And I love that. It's such a beautiful framework, and I wish we had more time to dive into some of your work, Mahim, but hopefully we'll have the chance to keep weaving together over the course of the next few years as we keep extending this. So thank you for spending a little bit of time with us. I'm going to jump over to Rory quickly, and then we're going to meet a very special person to round us out for the day. So Rory, can you tell us a little bit about your work and what it's been like digesting all of the ideas that have been put forward on this show?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I'm coming from Ireland right now, but thank you to everyone for being so eloquent and speaking so deeply about the things that I think are really important. To me, I think imagination is about thinking beyond, and I think it's about thinking beyond binary forms of thought. And I think that what comes with imagination is ultimately creativity, and with that, fear. And I think that is one of the main reasons why young people's voices are suppressed. It's because there is fear that we have such an ability to transform things with our own thought processes. And I personally believe that with my work with Youth for Positive Change, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to uplift these voices, because I think that there's something so truly transformative about being able to express ourselves deeply and thinking within those terms. I would say that, yeah, I think creativity, like, of course, it affects us all, and I think that it should be, promoted among every single age group, every single group, but especially among the people who, as have been mentioned, have been sort of ostracized from society. And those minority groupings, I think of the queer community and people of color, the Indigenous people around the world, young people who have really just been pushed aside. I think that creativity is a force that aligns with so many of our political philosophies and the ideologies that we hold right now of equality. And I think that, yeah, that's personally where I see it. But I think that the insights that you guys have brought up have really helped shape some opinions. Yeah.
It's one of those, you know, the reaction from the earlier actions and part of the, you know, what's got us here today has been so many of these like pretty gnarly systemic designs, as you mentioned, like when we've spoken about before, which have like really ostracized big sections and swathes of humankind. Now, one of the things which is like the opportunity is that if you're outside the margins, you have to be imaginative. You have to, you know, hustle and work out different ways to think, because none of the patterns are written for you. None of the systems are written for you. So you have to find ways to imagine and to move in a different playground. And when the world stops, like it has for the last couple of years, or when we hit some real pressure points, we suddenly like, oh, turns out rocking up to work in my suit 5 days a week and like going in and pressing some numbers and like the market will fix it all is maybe not a reality for the next 100 years. Then we need original thinking. And that becomes exciting, I think, because I think that the best trained original thinkers are sitting outside the margins because we haven't been patterned to move through and follow the status quo. So sometimes, you know, the intention from before to ostracize can create this genius potential for the next generation of what's required. So hopefully that's the opportunity that sits on the other side for so many people who've been pushed outside the margins.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, really looking forward to hanging out with you and then this next little period as we keep moving forward. So thanks for making the time to hang out with us. And last but not least, Francois, you've had an interesting life so far. Tell us a little bit about what's been moving through your mind as you've been hearing the different collection of people mashing together today. How are you feeling?
I feel grateful. I feel grateful to you, Jack, for bringing this IMAGI-NATION together, and all of us, inviting all of us to become citizens or planetizens of that nation. I feel grateful to all of those that have contributed, either in the chat or in the direct conversation. And I feel that indeed, this is the best, is that this is not ending. This is just a beginning, and that we have to imagine the way we want to continue this. But I feel that there is a fantastic potential in bringing, our various perspective and around imaginations, and so sort of a meta imagination, which is the, how do we imagine the best way to foster imagination? And I think that we heard amazing examples, both from young people and from different type of traditions or science and technology that can, I think, all foster imagination. And I think that collecting all of those, in a way, building a science of imagination and a crowdsourcing of the best way across cultures, from today and from yesterday, and maybe from tomorrow, to foster imagination, is maybe what we can achieve all together. And I think that that's typically something that none of us could do alone, and that collectively would be super meaningful. And so I would love to see this. I think that there is many ways of crowdsourcing, not only the means to imagine better, but also the ways to imagine our future. And I think that indeed, there is at least 7 billion, maybe 8 billion soon. And if we were to be able to tap into, say, animals' imagination, we could probably have a much bigger perspective on imagination.
Hundreds upon hundreds of billions. I tried to find a number the other day of other species, like hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of billion. The number just goes on and on and on.
And so let's say zillions. Okay, that's maybe the easiest way to quantify this in any imprecise way. And that's just the imagination on our planet. And so what about the imaginations on other planets, and, at least we can imagine what imagination is like on other planets. And maybe that's a way to, unleash our imagination one step further. And I think, there is plenty of ways of doing this and plenty of partners that can invite us to do this. I briefly mentioned in the chat, doing this with NASA, that is an European Space Agency, and all of those that are, currently exploring with the new space telescope planets around the universe. And so, given that imagination is the only thing that travels faster than light, that's our best way to travel in space and time, in the past and in the future, on this planet and other planets, is imagination. So, we can really be all invited to think about, say, planetary futures, the way Thomas More was inviting a utopia on an island during the Enlightenment. That's something we can do, because no islands is isolated, and so all of them would be underwater and will suffer climate change. But if you are on a completely different planet, you can start exploring and imagining the way other intelligent beings are solving their personal, local, and global problems. And by going away from our current constraints, maybe we'll imagine things that are so interesting that we can then import them back on our planet and maybe implement them. And so that's that would be my way of trying to push for this. And I think many people, including the Little Prince from the Saint-Exupéry and many others, could be partners on this. And so I think we can again do together things we could not do alone, and imagine way to imagine together further and better, and maybe even build a GPS of imagination to know that the sort of future you want, you're not the only one that wants to build it, and there are others that are on the same path. And maybe I will end with a couple of quotes. Of course, you all know John Lennon's famous quote, "I may be a dreamer, but I'm not the only one." And I think we are dreamers and imaginers here, and we are not the only ones. So that's the good news. And I think that the other quote I wanted to end with is Pierre Curie's quote that says, we have to make our life a dream and our dream a reality. So we have to, imagine individually and collectively our dream future, and then build it together. So thanks a lot to all of you. I don't want to be longer, because at least those that are in my time zone are probably hungry, and maybe others have other things to do. But thank you so much for organizing this, and looking forward to meeting each other again at the latest during the Learning Plants Festival. And so looking forward to all this. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francois. Yeah, I think that it rounds it back to almost the start of the conversation is the processes. So one of the things which I don't say the word very often, which I hate, is wasted potential. And I hate talk and then no action, or dreaming and then not working out how we kind of move through on it. So that's, I think, working through a design process as we can weave some of the intelligence which is gathered here today will be really powerful for us. So a couple of offers. I've been thinking quite deeply about death lately as a design principle for organizations, and a way for accelerating that life death and that movement of energy. And so thinking about what could be the potential death, intentional death of this lab, of this gathering around imagination. Is it a 5-year cycle? Is it a 9-year cycle? Is it a 10-year cycle, a 7-year cycle? Do we set ourselves something where we go, all right, we want to run at this for 5 years, and then we want to pass on the notes. So that's one offer to sort of think about, that we might come back and gather around. The next one is that we're happy to build like a really simple, blog world for us to kick it in. And I think when we're passing on knowledge and intelligence and going deep, that's when the internet's at its best. So there's a, building 20 out of MIT was a really beautiful, dilapidated building where I think 7 Nobel laureates sort of spun out of, and it was mainly through unlikely connections being mashed together and being able to hear what different people are doing, and then weave those tensions together. So we'd love to help bring that energy together, and then perhaps we can just use this platform as a laboratory that we can share these conversations, and we can see what's emerging, and come back every 2 or 3 months together. And I'd be happy to try and help shepherd 16 of us through some conversations, and whoever else joins us, and then to gather and share our different projects. So as we go away, I'll share the project on what we're working on over the next little period. So as I mentioned, we're working on building a digital country for the world called IMAGI-NATION, and we're hoping it will be a very big lab for human beings to come together and to center knowledge over the course of a decade. We're only going to run the network for 10 years because we don't want to build another empire. We want to intentionally sort of build towards passing it on. And over the course of the next 3 months, we'd love to come back and share the update on that project and how we're building that imagination and how we're building a system of imagining inside it as well. So we'll pull together a gathering of the knowledge from today, share this episode, build a website that we can imagine collectively on and share the knowledge of what we're working on. And you know, there's that wonderful and very important Margaret Mead quote that never forget a small group of committed citizens can change the world because it's the only thing that ever has. So I think, you know, a small group of us doing powerful work is a really wonderful and hopeful mashup, and I'm excited to work with a lot of you. So thanks for spending some time with us, and yeah, we'll follow up with some action and come back together either in 2 months or 3 months time and potentially before the next festival to see how we're going and try and keep a quarterly beat where we come back together and then let's just see what emerges. So thanks everybody for spending the time and hanging out. That's a wrap.